thing that pinged for you, the moment that maybe it wasn't even something I said, maybe it was something that David said, but that moment that something happened physically within you where maybe your gut tightened, maybe your heart opened up, maybe your shoulders got tighter, maybe they dropped, maybe you took a big breath. So if you had that kind of response at some point within this, that's your thing to take away from this. Because none of you that are listening are going to be able to retain, more than like 10% of what we discussed today. So your personal 10% is that part that spoke to you. It spoke to your heart, it spoke to your gut, it spoke to your breath. That's what I would hope you would take away.
Let's turn our attention inward and explore the thoughts and emotions that shape our experiences and discover how to live with more awareness and intention. I'm David Dawson, and this is Interaction. Traditionally, these blind contour drawings, they are a hand-eye coordination technique for artists just to begin to, look at an object and then draw what they're seeing without looking at the paper, without lifting their pen off the paper. And so the outcome tends to be just quite abstract. And to me too, it's just, there's a lot of metaphors with, the lens that we look through life through is going to be distorted. And what I see is going to be completely different than what you see. So just kind of a play on kind of the theme of the podcast as well, but also just a fun icebreaker because, for me, especially this being new to being on camera, interviewing, my anxiety sometimes can be a little bit high.
Yeah.
And so it's a way just to kind of calm the nerves and say, okay, let's not take ourselves so serious. Let's have some fun and just have a great conversation.
Yeah.
So,
nice.
All right. So let me know when you are ready with your pen and paper. And
Okay,
then
I'm
we
ready
can.
with my pen and paper.
Okay.
Am I supposed to do this with my left hand? Is that?
Are
or can I do
you
it with
left hand dominant?
No. But
You're
sometimes
not? Okay.
they with this kind of stuff, they're like, oh, use your opposite hand.
That if you're gonna do it, I'll do it, but you don't. That's not a rule. So
Let's
you
try
tell
it.
me.
Let's
Okay.
do it.
Are you gonna? Oh yeah. Wow. This is gonna be brutal.
Damn. Okay.
I know.
Yeah, left-handed. This is gonna be fun.
Hey, you started it. You're the one who suggested it. So
What the hell kind
let's
of
go ahead.
podcast is this, David?
I know. Well, we'll find out. We'll find out.
We can't look at the paper, can we?
No, you can't. That's kind of the fun part.
Oh yeah, that smile's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
I'm getting your teeth right now as well.
I bet they're not teeth.
There's something.
That laugh didn't help either.
All right, I am done. But you take as long as you want.
Holy shit.
Okay, you go first.
I feel like this is a bit insulting to you, but
Wow.
I feel like it looks more like me than it does you.
Well, here's yours. So I don't know if that's helpful.
I love it, dude. Yes, very Frankenstein.
Yes. It's always a fun one.
That's amazing. Thanks, David. That was fun.
No, yeah, that'd be kind of memorable to start off each guest with that. Yeah. But the plan too is also for me over time, I'll have a whole just book of all the drawings of all my guests. And then I want to do some sort of artistic thing with that. That could be just kind of fun. But so Andrew, thank you for spending time with me today. This is not how I ever thought we'd ever meet, but I am really honored that you're, going to share some wisdom from all the things that you've learned. And also, for me, my background watching you has been completely different than maybe a lot of people that are listening or know who you are. Since I do hair full time still, for a long time, I was watching you doing anything with, teaching tutorials of either hair cutting or hairstyling with Samvia. And so as I've, begun to start this podcast, I was kind of revisiting just different people that um, I've thought about over the years that have made some sort of impact on my life. And I came across your page and I was pleasantly surprised to see that you have um, started to switch roles and from at least from what I can tell. And so I really, wanted to get to know that story. But before we do, I really want to start with the very first question that I ask each guest,
Mm-hmm.
which can be quite vulnerable, but also to me kind of helps bridge that gap between the listener and the person that is being interviewed to kind of create some sort of relatable human connection. So the first question is, what is your current relationship with yourself like?
Hmm. This is a great question. Um, the first word that pops up for me is sacred. Um,
Ooh.
there's there's been kind of this turning point within mm, within this relationship with self just recently. Um, because I always feel like I've had a very close relationship with myself, but it hasn't always been sacred. Um, and I think a lot of you can probably relate to this. Portions of that relationship were downright abusive. The judgments being very abusive. Um, and recently, there's been this big shift for me, David, where um, that hurt child has honestly started to die. It's something that it had been driving the ship for such a long time, and not in a healthy way. That it was almost like there was the elder Andrew and the hurt child Andrew, both kind of competing for space, and then there was this kind of like central entity that I would call, quote, me, that was like hands on the wheel, actually doing the driving of the ship. But it was like there was this constant, I think of that Bugs Bunny cartoon with like the two devil, or like the devil on one shoulder and, the angel on the other shoulder.
Yeah.
It was kind of like hurt child Andrew, and then wise old elder Andrew on my two shoulders, competing for, no, turn left here, no, believe this, no, think this about yourself. And so for a long time, there was this kind of higher conscious elder in me that was very loud still, like it was still very present, saying, hey, like here's the reality. Like that was the voice of what I kind of call like capital T truth. But then there was also the hurt child, Andrew, that was still looking to get needs met that weren't met, still looking to get a sense of approval from other people, still looking outside of himself for the answers, and then judging itself for not being able to get what it thought it wanted. Like I said, I think because of um, the time I've spent and the things I've done for myself, that hurt child it's literally starting to die, and there's this this very sacred relationship that's developing pretty much right now, like as we speak. Um, it, it it has a lot less judgment to it. It has a hell of a lot more acceptance for just my humanness, um, and just a lot of like just pure love for myself and um, for the man I'm currently becoming.
Oh man, what a wonderful answer. So, like, when I just want to know, kind of, what does sacred mean to you? Because for some people with religious backgrounds or whatever, like they might interpret that differently than maybe how you might be um, thinking it is. So I just want to make sure I'm interpreting it correctly as well.
It's a good question because, as much as I do have relationship with a higher sense of power. To me, I just call it source or spirit. For some, they might call it God. And in many ways, I think we're talking, just my opinion, I feel like we're talking about the same thing. We just have different forms that we're referring to it in. So for me, that sacredness is really the recognition that this body and this mind, this spirit that I call me, um, it's part of source. It's part of spirit. It's part of God. So when I say sacred, it's looking at myself as what I truly am, which is this part of spirit, part of God, part of source.
So as your love for yourself has increased, as this younger part of you is beginning to, in your words, kind of die, but
Mhm.
maybe quiet down, how has that changed, as your relationship with yourself has increased in a more expansive way? How has that affected your relationship with the ones that that you work close to,
Mm.
family members, et cetera? How's that shifted?
I feel like I definitely treat well, I interact with them differently. Very um it has shifted towards more of a response type of relationship versus a reaction type of relationship, because that part of me that was interacting with them, with a source of, well, I have to get a need met. Um,
Yeah.
which, by the way, just I want to be clear too when I say getting that need met. It's not like I was consciously aware that I was treating the people in my life or speaking to them in a way that had this coloration from my own personal set of needs. That happens very subconsciously. So it's more conscious now, where in my interactions, it's very thoughtful. I feel much more thoughtful. Let me say that it can't be 100% thoughtful. That's almost impossible. But I feel like I'm much more conscious and aware of what's happening within the relationship, and instead of focusing on what do I need, or allowing my subconscious to come in and dictate the conversation from a sense of what does it need, it's what does the relationship need? What does the conversation need? My wife and I, we're really fortunate. We get a lot of time to just sit and talk with each other. We've really designed a lifestyle where pretty much every morning we sit on the couch and drink coffee and look out the window and play with the dogs and have these really deep conversations about life. And um, even those conversations, I feel like, are different now, because instead of instead of how do I explain it? Instead of it being kind of like a transactional type of a conversation, um, I feel like I've always been a pretty good listener, but my listening has even upgraded because, again, there's much less of that subconscious coloration of, well, I need to be right. I need my perceptions to be proven correct through this discussion. It's like, no, I feel really safe now because I have this deep relationship with myself. I have my safety within me. I don't need for what she says or how I respond to prove myself correct, because I feel solid within myself. And so I get to have these conversations in a very different way. I even get to ask questions in a very different way. My questions no longer have a kind of sub intent of, well, don't you think that my way is right? So
Man,
yeah.
that's challenging, especially in marital relationships or long-term relationships, family, where history definitely can dictate how much we see and colors that relationship. And so so important. So I mean, for me too, like wondering, and I do want to circle back to the listening part later
Mhm.
on, but how did you go from, in a way you've always been kind of in this educational space of teaching and presenting information, but how did you begin to transition from, hair, and maybe even for a brief moment, maybe briefly say how you got into hair too, because that's an
Mhm.
interesting story. But then going from that into kind of the personal development, and also, well, I'll stop there. I have more questions, but we'll stop there.
Just a couple questions at a time, David. I
Yes.
can't pay attention. So yeah, my hair career started because initially I wanted to be a rock star. Like so many people, growing up in the music scene, I had dreams of, oh, I'll be in a band, we'll travel and we'll tour, and that transition to wanting to be a studio musician or maybe even work in a recording studio. And I had a short period of time when I first moved to Salt Lake City in 1997. I got to work in a recording studio called Boho Digitalia. To- Sorry, Bruce, but that was a terrible name, brother. But
Wow.
anyway, so I got to record some bands there because Bruce was really sweet. At first, I was just there to assist him, but he would let me bring in bands of my own after hours and record. And through that process, it was actually kind of ruining music for me because working with these bands and trying to get these perfect recordings and um, after a recording session, I just want to get in my car and turn the radio off. Like I didn't want to hear recordings. And a lot of my favorite bands, it's like those CDs at the time, um,
What are
were
those? Right?
yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. But they were kind of ruined because I would hear a snare drum or something. I'm like, oh gosh, that snare drum sounds terrible. It sounds like they're just like beating a telephone book with a stick or something. And then one of my favorite albums was ruined because I couldn't get my ears past recording quality stuff. So that's just like one little example of how, at first my dream was to be part of this music industry. But the further I got into it and made it my actual career, it actually started to kill the thing that I loved the most, which was music. So at that point, I was like, okay, I need a career. I need to find something that I can do that still gives me space for music. And my sister was a hairdresser. And I would sometimes go help her out at her salon, and I would see how her clients would come in. It kind of just seemed like she was having fun with friends. It didn't even seem like a job. And then they'd hand her like a wad of cash, and she was the booth renter and a pretty free moving person. So she would just like take off for like a week or two and go somewhere else or like go visit a friend, and it just seemed like there was a lot of freedom. It didn't seem like work, and she seemed to be making a pretty good living from it. So I was like, hmm, maybe I could do that. And so in that process, she had gone to hair school and had a terrible experience in hair school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where we grew up. And so she had heard that you could apprentice within Salt Lake City. And she's like, why don't you find an apprenticeship instead of going to hair school? And that's when I met Tyson Daniel. And
Okay.
that was a really pivotal moment within my life because Tyson and David, the two guys that were working at that salon that I got to assist and apprentice under, they showed me that there was so much more potential within the hair industry than I would have ever thought there was because they were doing great things. They were doing photo shoots, they were doing runway work, they were out teaching classes. And pretty much within the first year of my apprenticeship, I got a chance to start teaching classes. I was teaching TG product knowledge classes. So I was going to salons and like, hey, this is blah, blah, blah shampoo and it has vitamins A, C, and E and, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The,
Did
the
that come
reason that
natural
that
to
part
you too? Or is that something that like you really had to learn?
totally, and I had to learn it.
Okay.
it, it, it felt, it felt really rewarding. like, wow, this is for me, but it didn't feel natural as far as the actual process of teaching. That was something I really had to learn. So it definitely was that first gift of, hey, this is going to be something important. And pretty much, yeah, from this was before I even had a hair license at this point. I was already a teacher within the industry. And that became something that was inseparable within my career. Like I had to be a teacher alongside being a hairdresser. And so that first introduction with Tyson, that's why I said it was so pivotal. It wasn't just that it was, he was a great teacher in and of himself. So I got to learn really good techniques of hairdressing and fall in love with the craft and artistry of hair. But almost more importantly, he introduced me into education, which is still part of my life, even after the artistry has left.
Wow. And so then how did that, and how long did you do hair for before kind of either slowly or maybe quickly transitioning into the personal development space?
It was slowly, then suddenly. I don't know
All
if you've
right.
heard that quote, "Things happen
I
slowly, then
haven't,
they
no.
happen suddenly." That's how I really see a lot of this is, um, I'll try to keep a somewhat long story condensed. Um, once I left my apprenticeship with Tyson, I started to work at lunatic fringe salons, and I got introduced um, to Dennis James, who quickly became a huge mentor in my life, and he was helping to develop Paul Mitchell the School. And so they needed people within the Paul Mitchell the School team to go out and start to train the other people, the other educators at the schools to do certifications and trainings within the schools. So I got to be part of that kind of first team that went out and helped to train the Paul Mitchell schools. Through that process, I was also trying to maintain the crazy hours that so many hairdressers do. I was still working like, 12-hour workdays at the salon, trying to fit in as many possible clients and make as much money as possible. And then I would fly out on the weekend, go teach at some school, fly home Monday night, Tuesday morning. I was right back at it, 40, 50-hour work weeks at the chair. So it only took it only took about 4 years of that for me and to get really burned out to the point that I considered leaving the industry completely. Fortunately, I had a life coach at that time, Lynn Christian, and we went through a process together that she helped me to identify that if I was going to leave this position, as at that point I was actually the education director for Paul Mitchell Advanced Education, and I thought I was even going to quit doing hair at the salon at that point. We figured out that a pretty natural transition would be into more just life coaching, because really that was my role so much within the schools and even within the salons was I was a coach to people. So I got to go through her first classes to learn how to be a life coach. This was 2009, I think, that I went through her classes and became a certified life coach. And so I started to do life. I resigned from Paul Mitchell Advanced Education, stayed at the salon because I needed a paycheck, and then started doing life coaching on the side. And I think picking up that life coaching piece, um, it it gave me more fuel. It gave me what I was looking for, and so the hair stuff didn't feel so depleting anymore. And so I was able to kind of fall back in love with hairdressing at that point, and basically from that point until current day, coaching has been sort of a side project. Well, from 2009 until 2021, coaching was a side project. In 2021 is when I finally quit my position as the artistic director for Samvia, and just was like, I'm done with hair. I'm hanging up my scissors, and that was the transition to full time, just focusing on my coaching and facilitation.
So with, do you still cut anyone's hair? by chance, or are you
Just my
completely
wife
out?
and my mom. That's it.
Hey, is that stressful, by the way? Like cutting my wife's hair is probably like the hardest thing because she's also a hairdresser. And so like the amount of trepidation that I have cutting my wife's hair because she has her method that she wants to approach the hair. Um, I've heard at least but my personal experience is, you know, it's a cutting family is challenging.
So my wife Michelle, she did actually start to go through an apprenticeship to do hair. Back with Tyson as well before I left that salon. She didn't go very far with it because she found for herself it just wasn't the right fit. Hair just wasn't her thing. So I don't think that she ever got far enough into it to kind of go to that place with me of like, well, I don't know. Will you approach it this way or will you approach it that way? So she's pretty trusting with me. Um, but dude, she's had some bad haircuts by me. I'll just be the first one to admit
Oh,
it.
I
But
know.
she's been
I've
very
totally
kind about
same
it.
thing. Yeah, some of the tears have been, because I did mess up. So I will admit that too.
Yeah.
So really quick, so like, is your like with your personal development, do you have a specific niche? Is it mainly men? Is it men and women? Are you, you know, or is there a certain demographic that you tend to kind of find yourself in?
So that has evolved pretty naturally, actually. In the beginning, it was 99% just hairdressers, and that was just because that's who I had relationships with. Well, actually, let me adjust that because when I very first started to introduce myself as like a life coach, I actually didn't work a lot with hairdressers. I had people that were clients of mine at the chair that would hire me as a life coach.
I can see that.
And
That makes
and so at
sense.
first, yeah, I got to work with quite a few different types of people. But then over time, I think just naturally it became this thing that I primarily was working with hairdressers because the people that were seeking me out were also seeking out not just my coaching, but also my mentorship because they're like, oh, I see that Andrew's done something within the industry that I want to do. So I'm going to go to him for that coaching and mentorship. Um, once I left my position with Sam, I I didn't I didn't purposely focus my attention on hairdressers though. I started to open up to um, really kind of almost anything and everything because still at that point I was putting my feet into ponds, going, do I like this pond? Do I like this pond? I was pretty much like calling up my homies and being like, okay, I don't have a job. So what can we do together? Like what kind of projects can we do together? What kind of events can we do together? So most of them still were within the beauty industry, and still to this day, I'd say 80%, 90% even of my coaching clients, the companies that I work with, still are within the industry, but it's starting to expand out past that. It's both men and women. I have no preference there. Um, I think what's kind of cool is there have been more men starting to show up for coaching, which I'm super super happy about because, um, men, dudes, we got to stop acting like we can do all this shit ourselves. Like we
Yeah, man.
really have to get past this, and it's happening. I see it happening all over the place. I was just at the Sacred Sons of retreat weekend for leadership a couple weekends ago. And, they're having events where there's like 200-300 men coming in for this men's work. So the paradigm is shifting for sure. And so if you are a dude out there and still stuck in this kind of paradigm of no, like the old school quote masculinity, this actually isn't masculinity, but we've called it masculinity. This concept that like, well, I'm strong. And no one else is going to do it for me. I have to do it myself. and there's a piece of that of course is true. Like no one else can do your work for you, right, David? Like you
Yeah.
yes have to do it for yourself, but that doesn't mean you can't have support. That doesn't mean you can't have mentorship. That doesn't mean that you can't have someone there when things are coming down around you to hold you up. That's not weakness. That that's actually how society is built. Like that's how we're supposed to be. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm stoked to see more more men stepping into my coaching clientele now too. Because for a long time it
Yeah.
was basically like 95% female. Um, but yeah, I'm starting to see that change.
So, in your opinion, with as more men are starting to realize kind of this old paradigm is no longer working in today's
Mhm.
society, what do you feel like men are needing most?
It's a big, huge question. I'm gonna give you kind of like the base level answer. Like if we take everything off and just go like straight to the like most basic level, I think men need the same thing that well, pretty much all humans on this planet need. They need connection and they need safety. That's what all of us need. I don't care what do you identify as. That's a basic human need that is really challenged right now within our society. There's very few people that feel safe. There are very few people that feel like they have true connections. What I mean by true connections are connections that they can trust completely, that they can say the things that they're afraid to say out loud and not just get booted out of the community. Cancel culture, I get the purpose by why this has become a thing. It has derailed and turned into complete and total poison within our society. I Like I said, I get why it started, and there were a lot of people that got canceled that yeah did need booted. What happened with this train though is it went off the tracks and turned into, well, you don't agree with me, we don't have the same exact ideas, so you no longer belong in my community, you're out. That to me is not safety and that is not connection. So
Yeah.
on the most foundational level, I think all humans, and this actually goes into polyvagal theory, and for us to have our nervous system operate the way it's supposed to operate, that's what Porges found within polyvagal theory. Those are the two things that have to be present. For me to not be in a state of constant fight, flight, or actual just complete shutdown, to be in this place of what he calls ventral vagal state, which is the peaceful present state, I have to have safety and I have to have connection. And it's something that not a lot of people have right
So, I totally agree. Even in my closest relationships, feeling skittish and having my nervous system or be dysregulated because I'm beginning to share vulnerable things, but because there's so much of my life tied to these people that
now.
if I do get judgment or anything, well, then that could really affect my personal life deeply, and so that can be a huge fear that I've experienced. That I'm beginning to wrap my head around and try and um, take myself out of that box and those around me out of the box. Because if I don't show up differently, then I'm not allowing them to really show up all that much different either, because I'm projecting how they're going to react. And so I'm not offering any new possible solutions. And so for you though, what has been some of the most helpful things for you to feel safe? Because someone listening, male or female, who has a dysregulated nervous system on a regular basis, there's lots of ideas out there of what to do, but it's sometimes nice just to know what has been helpful for someone. And then see how that resonates for them. And if that's interesting, they can go down the path of searching that out.
Yeah. For me, the thing that creates the most safety and on a really foundational level is really tapping into my sovereignty. The fact that like I can create and I can um, be what I need within myself. Not from a way of kind of like I said, the old school mentality of like, well, I'm a man, I can do everything myself. But it's releasing this sense of, well, I have to look outside of myself for someone's approval. Because as soon as I have to get the approval from outside, the ability to actually feel safe and, like you said, for me to show up completely and authentically and honestly, if in every room I walk into, I'm worried about if I'm going to get their approval or not, it's going to be really hard for me to ever feel completely safe in those spaces. And so for me, I think that what's created the most safety for me, and I grew up in a way that I really craved outside approval. I was kind of the chameleon in school. I was friends with the jocks. I was friends with the punks. I was friends with the wrestling kids. I was friends with the cheerleaders. But in each space, like at my heart, it was, this like punk rock skateboard kid. But I could go over to the jock bench and be like, "Hey dudes, what's up? Like, dude, I I saw your truck out there. Like those new wheels on your truck are badass, dude. Like you go mudding this weekend, you know." And so I could adapt myself and chameleon myself.
I feel
And
like that's
I
very
will say
common for
that I think,
hairdressers, by the way. That's
yeah,
a common
totally.
trait amongst hairdressers.
I think it was part of what made me a good hairdresser, honestly, David. Like, I think my ability to kind of adapt to different people definitely made me quite successful at the chair. Because I have a way of making people feel safe through that. Like I can mirror
Hmm.
them, I can connect with them on almost anything. If you drive a garbage truck, I will be so stoked to find out the details of like where does the garbage go? How do you sort the garbage? Like how does that little mechanical thing, like that arm that comes out and picks up the trash can, like tell me how that works. Like I love that kind of shit. So there was a very authentic aspect to it, but there was also a part of it that was me trying to get something from the outside that I did not have within me, which was a sense of security, a sense of sovereignty. Like I really needed that external approval. And that continued way into my hairdressing career. Like I took on identities to try to fit so that I would be accepted. And there were lots of parts of me that didn't get shown during that time out of fear of exactly what you just said, man. Like if I show up and actually say this out loud in a room where I know that most of these people aren't going to agree with that perception, that puts my place within this community at risk, which is deep down really one of the biggest fears. And by the way, those of you that say you actually don't give a shit what anyone else thinks, I think I think you need to dig a little deeper, friends.
Sometimes
Because
they give the most shits, but that's a defense mechanism too, right? They
yeah,
don't want to show
because
anything.
that's a necessary part of who we are. It's ingrained in our DNA to be part of a community. We can't survive as the lone wolf. It doesn't exist. We can't just be this individual nomad. I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, I'm sure plenty of you could be like, well, what about this person? What about this person? And yes, we do have stories of these individuals, these lone wolves that, you know, but for most of us, let's say, for most of us, our DNA tells us we want to be in community. So to say that I could give a shit less what anyone else thinks in this world, that kind of goes to the opposite extreme where that's a defense mechanism. Because if I do want to be in community, there is going to be a part of me that does care what you think about me. That's very different from feeling insecure about how I feel about myself. If I have to have your approval, if I have to have your um your thoughts be positive about me for me to feel good about myself, that's different. But of course I care about what you think about me, David. Like I want to be your friend, man. Like I want us to have a good relationship. So of course I give a shit about what you think about me. And if I have a healthy relationship with myself, I'm not going to give up who I am to make you feel good about me, but I can step into an actual conversation like, hey, let's talk about this. Like I just showed up vulnerably to you and that seems to upset you. Let's talk about this. Instead of, oh, no, no, no. You know what? That's not what I meant. Because that would have been the old me. If I would have shown up and said something and saw your face go, oh, I don't know if I like that. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong, man. Like what I'm trying to say here is blah, 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 blah. So it's very different.
Yeah, I really like what you've said, and I wanted to, something that was coming up for me when you were saying that is this idea of embodiment that I've seen
Mhm.
on your Instagram page and stuff like that, like being able to start to embody these things that through action. And so I want to touch base on what that is because my wife and I were hiking with our kids over the summer, and we overheard this gentleman talking to some other family, and he said something that my wife picked up on, and she brought it to my attention. I loved it, and he was talking about a friend that said, this person, they have a low say do ratio. And so
Mhm.
one of those things, it was like, oh my gosh, like, so I started to reflect, how many of the things do I say do I actually take action on, or do I follow through with? And so then I started to just start to like account like, all right, well, where can I start to have more accountability or integrity with what I'm saying? And maybe not, to try and sound good, but be like, okay, what do I actually feel in my body that is going to move the needle forward in the direction that I want? And so could you, talk to me really quickly about, you know, what embodiment means for you, because you have discussed it on your Instagram page. And I think that this could be really helpful for some people that, um, like myself too, where sometimes we talk a lot, but there's little action or there's
Yeah.
little, reflection in the passion behind what we're saying.
Nice. It's and thanks for your honesty too, because I think that that's something that again we need to hear from each other. We need to hear this honesty that it's like, hey, I do this because one of the things for me as a coach, and I know that people look to me for mentorship. Um, so I feel an incredible responsibility to also be very, very open and vulnerable about my imperfection. Because I think that one of the things that has also kind of turned somewhat poisonous is the constant presence of you can do anything. And if you just dream about it, you will have it. And here are the 5 easy steps to, always being an embodiment. And like we've hyper simplified and made things really pretty and perfect because that's what sells, because that's what gets attention, it's what gets likes, it's what gets shares. Like no one shares the post that's like, I'm a pretty good coach, and if you do your work, you might have some great improvements within your life. That doesn't gain attention, that doesn't gain followers, that doesn't get like that doesn't get discovery calls booked. But I gotta be honest, that's the truth. Like, I'm a
Well,
really good
yeah.
coach, but I can't do the work for you. I can't promise you 3 easy steps to perfection. I can't promise you that if you just do my breath work that I teach, that your nervous system will be perfectly regulated in every situation in life, because it's false. That's not the way we are. Like, we're so complex. And so anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a side note. I just wanted to celebrate you for saying so openly. hey, yeah, like I show up this way sometimes. Sometimes, and I do the same thing, dude. Like I absolutely have grown up as the person that has said yes too much. And it's because of a couple things, at least for me. And I think that a lot of people will resonate with this. Number one, it comes back to that sense of security and looking for a sense of security and approval outside of ourselves. Because yes is something that people love to hear. People love a yes person because it's like, hey, could, gosh, I just need someone to really do this for me. Oh, I got it. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. That feels really good, especially to my deep need for approval and connection. That feels awesome for someone to be like, oh, thank you so much, Andrew. I so appreciate you doing this for me. That feels really good in a healthy way and also in a unsupportive way. If it's feeding something that's unsupportive within me. So we say yes too often because we're looking for that outside approval. We're looking for that love and connection. And yet again, another story that we've been taught, and I think especially as cis men, growing up as a cis boy, I was in a world that was told that boys were told you need to show up, dry up those tears, shrug off your shoulders. Oh, what? You've got a hard life? Tough shit. Get up and do it. Make it happen. And so we were taught our entire lives to shrug off our needs, to shrug off any sort of pain, any sort of suffering that we might be feeling, and do it because we're men. Say yes because we're men. Give ourselves over to other people's needs and wants. And I know that everyone has gotten that message in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of people, not just cis men, I'm sure can relate to this as well. But I have to speak from where my experience. So there's that piece. There's also the piece that within both of the major companies that I worked for, Lunatic Fringe and Paul Mitchell the School, for that first, really significant part of my career, they were companies that had culture principles that said, we are yes people. What we'd never heard was, and it's okay to give a no sometimes. It's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to protect your own needs and wants. That was never told to me for the first, long time in my career. And it's something that I've brought into the spaces that I became leaders later. I brought into those leadership positions that permission later in my career as I became a bit wiser about this stuff. I did bring those into those leadership conversations. Hey, here's an opportunity, and it is okay if this is too much. I need you to tell me if this is too much. That's not something I was ever sure. That's not something that was ever said to me.
Yeah, you had, when you're mentioning, me being vulnerable, something I really admired and respected on your page is, you actually were being vulnerable about an encounter that you had with a door-to-door salesman where you did not show up in a manner that you were as proud of as, and just kind of reflecting like, what, I did not treat that person as well as I know I could have. And so I wanted to kind of recognize that in yourself, to call it out and to also put it out there saying like, even though I have, I'm here in the personal development space and I'm here to help coach people through seeing their own blind spots. I still have my own. And here's an example of that. And so I want to also extend the, um, gratitude of you being vulnerable and kind of sharing like your human side, because that's something that I think is often missed in this platform that we, call the internet, where, yeah, we want to put only the best curated versions of whatever it is that we're selling out there. And there's a huge spectrum of what we're not seeing behind the scenes.
Yep.
And, when I listen to anyone that has, these really impressive, but very strict guidelines of like my absolute go tos every single day, non negotiables, and they start listing off all these things. And I'm going, man, that sounds like you're really wound up. Like, what happens? Like, are you flexible in anything? Like,
Hmm.
or do you have like, and are you capable of pivoting, or are you so fixated on your goal that you're actually missing out a huge portion of life because you're unable to see it from any other way? And so it
Mm.
seems like, at least from my perspective, the little that I've um, seen what you've put out and everything, you have this ability to have that relatable sense with your clients or with people that are interested in just who you are. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm still just as human and make mistakes. And let me kind of expose some of that so that we can relax and exhale a little bit. So thank
Absolutely.
you
Thank you.
for that. Yeah.
Yep. And
What do you feel
that
like is
honestly,
your, oh, go ahead.
well,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say too, because I don't think I fully answered your initial question, which is that piece of the embodiment, and I think that that is a huge piece of the embodiment, is finding the security within ourselves to be fully open. Because if we're always kind of um, manipulating the situation, manipulating how we say things or shape things to try to get something or try to gain approval, that is going to be a blockage for us for sure. And so I think really there was something that they said at that Sacred Sons event that I loved, and I think a lot of people would relate to. Um, you can't heal what you don't reveal. And
Ooh,
so if we're on
that's
this
good.
way and towards, well, I want to be embodied, which for those of you that may be like, what does that even mean? For me, the simplest way to think about it is I stop saying that this is who I am and trying to be that. And at that point, I actually become the thing that I say that I am. I become, instead of, oh, well, I'm a trustworthy person and I say yes to the things that I actually can do. At first, that might need to become kind of an affirmation of sorts. And we might not do it because it's a thought, it's a vision of who we want to be. And we can feel inside of ourselves like that higher self is there all the time. And there is that higher self going, no, that is who you really are. Like, no, Andrew, like you are the person that follows through when you're your highest self. But remember, I still have all these parts and pieces of me that have other needs and wants that get in the way and sometimes get their hand on my steering wheel. So I continue to do the work of, okay, man, drop the ball again. No problem. Acceptance, make a different choice. Do it again. Oh, drop the ball again. Damn. No, I am the person who follows through when I say yes. Oh, yeah, just had a big discovery there. And this last one, that also means I have to start saying no to the things I know I can't keep my word on. Whew, okay, next level. We start to do the work there. Okay, can I say no to this person? Yes, I can say no to this person. So that's the stage of like really kind of quote doing the work. That isn't quite embodiment yet because we're still in the process of kind of consciously having to readjust and change how we show up. At some point, it's not that we'll show up perfectly. That's not the point. If as an embodiment of yes, I do the things I say I do, there will still be times I'll fall out of alignment with that. But instead of having to, you know, later that night journal about it and the next day try to do a process around it, that's doing the work. It's like in the moment, I'm starting to catch, oh, you just said yes to something that, you can't keep your promise. And I'll in the moment, because it's more of an embodiment of that person now. It's like, you know what? I'm sorry. I have to take that back. I just said yes to something I know I can't actually follow through on. So let's talk further about this. That's when we start to step into that embodiment phase, because we're becoming that person. And again, that doesn't mean we're perfect at it. It just means that it's not just work we're doing, it's something we are becoming.
That's so good. What is this retreat that you've referred to several times to, like, because there's plenty of opportunities out there for people to go and do these types of things, but how did you pick this one? What made you decide that this is one that you want to spend time and resources on?
Hmm. This is a great question, because this is something I'd love to just even offer as advice to those of you out there who are looking at, should I hire a coach? Should I go to a retreat? Should I go to this event? Should I go to this gathering? Um, Really, we have to, as consumers, practice discernment and really start to trust ourselves to guide our decisions and look past the marketing, because marketing has become so brilliant at this point. People know how to get you to sign up for their coaching. People know how to, companies know how to get you signed up for their $1 million retreats that promise the world and back. Like, there is just so much good marketing out there that as consumers, I think we have to get way smarter and really operate from our like internal and intuitive guidance system versus kind of the mind's ability to be manipulated by false promises and all of that type of stuff. So I'm glad that you asked this, because this is something that I do feel is really important. So Sacred Sons, it's a men's organization. They don't call it men's work; they call it masculine alchemy, which I think is awesome. I just love that
Hmm.
shift. Um, I was first introduced to it by my good friend Earl Sagewolf, who actually is also a hairdresser in Salt Lake City. And I've known him since back when I was a partner in the Sugar House salon. So he himself, I've watched him go through such an incredible transformation of like having a really hard time back in the day when I first met him, to really developing into this incredible man who really is becoming that embodiment of who he says he is. So watching him go through this development, and he started to talk about, well, a big part of credit was to this group Sacred Sons that he was going to events with. So I ended up going, they had an online version of their big yearly gathering that they do, Convergence. And I think it was in 2020, because I think it was the summer of COVID when I was like, I'm not going to a live event right now. But they kind of like bucked the system. They're like, we're doing it. We're just gonna go for it. So I did the online version. So I was out in my travel camper with my laptop, like beating on my chest and screaming at the top of my lungs and like doing all these men's work, exercises. And it was awesome. Like, I really enjoyed it. So that got me connected to that group. I've listened to most of the podcast episodes that they have out, and I just really found that I had a resonance with how they spoke about the world and how they saw the world. And so I get their emails, and this one for Prime Leadership, which is their 4-day event, and it's a smaller event. They only take about 30 people for this one. It popped up in my email, and I just immediately got this big intuitive hit where I was like, "Ooh, I think this might be the one to go to." And I just really trusted in it. And I called Earl and I was like, "Hey, I got kind of an intuitive hit on this Prime Leadership. Do you think this is a right fit for me? And like, me." And he's like, "Hey, if you're called to it and it seems like the right fit," he's like, "I think you will definitely get a lot from it." And so I had that trust because I had someone that I personally trusted who had been to a lot of it. He's actually a facilitator for them now too. He was going to be part of the facilitation of that group that weekend. So I had that personal connection. I built relationship over time with them, and I really trusted in my internal wisdom, my intuition to guide me and say, because it wasn't cheap. So, and I'm not a super wealthy person. I can't just like go to these retreat weekends every other weekend. That's not my budget. So I do have to be really discerning when I spend that money. I have a commitment to myself that I will spend those funds each year to continue my own development, but I do have to be really discerning. And so that's how I found my way to that particular event, and it was pivotal. I know that my intuition spoke the truth, because that weekend was a turning point of this process that I've been in for a very long time. It's How do I describe it? It was kind of like I can't describe it quite as clear as I'd like to, but it's almost like the accelerator just hit the floor for a minute. Like I've been doing that work, and then in 4 days, it's like within 4 days, I felt like I did the work of 10 months.
Wow. If it's not too personal of a question, what did you learn about yourself, or what's one thing you learned about yourself in those 4 days?
It's not too personal at all. I'm a pretty open book. um, I would say my biggest takeaway is I always had this nice guy syndrome. I'm a very kind, loving, compassionate person, and I love that about myself. I had to develop that part of myself, and it's something that I really pride myself on, is that I'm a very loving, very compassionate person. The part that was unsupportive is I had created this identity of the nice guy. And again, it comes back to everything that we've talked about so far. I did it because I wanted people's approval, because the nice guy gets this kind of soft approval from anywhere. The challenge of the nice guy syndrome is that we don't stand up for ourselves. We don't form healthy boundaries and keep them. We have, and by the way, I do think that boundaries should have some flexibility for the most part. Different situations require a different level of permeability within those boundaries. But pretty much all of my boundaries were mostly permeable.
Same. You're
Yeah.
speaking to the choir here.
Yeah. So what I've been developing for myself for quite a few years now is the understanding that I can still say no. I can still have healthy, solid boundaries and do it from a loving and compassionate place. That kind of higher self version of me knew that to be true. And I would even teach this in a lot of my classes, especially my communication courses that I would facilitate. We would often get to a place, and questions from the audience would come up specifically about this, like, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I kind of confront this without being mean or without being rude? And it's like, we can confront things and do it from a compassionate and loving place. I would say those things, and I knew those things on kind of this like higher self kind of level, but there was still a part of me, a piece of me that was so attached to this nice guy identity that I had built. So one of the things that Sacred Sons does in these weekends, and I was really afraid of this, was they call it sacred combat. So you put on boxing gloves, and you can wear headgear if you want, and they make sure you have a mouth guard and all that stuff before you show up. And you do a 2-minute boxing round with one of the other brothers there. And I was terrified of this. I've been doing a martial art called Aikido for about 7 years. But within that martial art, we don't punch each other. Like, we don't actually strike. It's Aikido. A lot of people call it battle yoga, because it's more of the actual design and purpose of this martial art was if you're being attacked, to find a way to protect yourself from being harmed, but also not to return harm on the person that's attacking you. It's to neutralize the situation, to end the actual struggle, end the fight. And, I grew up in the punk rock scene. So, the skinheads would bust into our shows all the time and start these big brawls and stuff. I was always the person like pulling people apart and trying to like end the fight. I never threw a punch in my entire life. So I'm coming into this weekend terrified of this experience and just like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if I can actually punch someone. So I get to the event and they didn't really get to me until one of the last days where it was kind of like, finally, they were like, okay, who hasn't stepped in? And I stepped in. At this point, this was almost a month ago, I was also having some pretty bad back pain. And I wasn't sure what was going on. I'd been having this back pain for a while. I was like, and I've got like a really bad hernia right now.
Oh man.
And so I was kind of like, I don't know like if I can really do this. But there was a brother there that he was older. Um, I think he said he was 72. The dude didn't look 72. But that means he's almost 30 years older than me. 40, 50, 60, 70. Yeah, almost 30 years older than me. And he was like, "Hey, if you want, we could." Well, I kind of looked at him and he looked at me and he was like, "Yeah, I would totally be willing to just like, we can go easy," because he was like, "My back's not doing great either." Because I just put it up. I was like, I got a bad back right now. I got a fucking hernia. Like, sorry, but
You can say
anyway,
whatever you want on here.
okay. He steps up and he's like, "Hey, I'll do this with you." And so one of the beautiful things that they do in this and the reason they call it sacred combat is because they're really clear. This isn't a fight. This isn't about winning or losing a fight. This isn't about hurting someone else. Like they make it really clear up front, and they make sure it's safe. And they say, "Okay, let's make an agreement with each other. What's the power level here?" And that, like, nothing above 70%. This is not going to be a full on throw your hardest punch kind of fight. Like nothing above 70%. So what do you guys want to agree on? And so I think I'm safe to say his name. I don't want to say his full name because I want to make sure I keep his confidentiality, but his name was John. And John and I were like, I think 40% feels pretty comfortable to me. And so
That would
then
have been
they
like
have
1%, half a percent,
yeah. There was part of me that was going to be like 15, but I was like, nothing's going to happen at 15%. Like that's not going to be the experience. Because it was also a part of me too, David. I was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to actually get the experience of it. Like if I'm going to get hit, I want it to actually feel like what it feels like to actually get punched. So we said 40%, and then they have you test it. So you just punch each other in the shoulder once, like, okay, what's your 40%? What's your 40%? So both of you can kind of feel the energy and say like, yeah, that feels good to me. So nice guy steps into the ring. They say go. And everyone's like, all right, come on, guys, come on, let's go. And John, he wasn't fucking around, dude. Like he came in and he just started he was just punching. I had my hands up and my gloves were just kind of like punching me in the face because he just kept like going and going and going. And like he was just not backing down at all. And I was like, dude, I don't know if I want to punch this guy. He's in his 70s. He's got a bad back. Like all of these things were kind of running through me. The nice guy was showing up. And at one point, John like swung kind of like, I think it was kind of like a right hook and like hit me in the side of the head pretty solid. And like enough that I was kind of like, dude, that was pretty intense. And he's like, oh, sorry. But I in that moment, I stepped back and I was like, this isn't what John wants. He doesn't want to be treated like some feeble old man right now. He doesn't want me to be like, oh, I don't want to hurt John. Like he's throwing punches like a wild guy. He wants to mix it up. He wants to have some fun. And so there was something really cool that turned on for me, like that kind of peaceful, loving, compassionate warrior showed up. And I was like, all right, John, let's go. So I started to punch back and like we had such a blast. Like we had so much fun. And in 2 minutes, both of us were exhausted. The bell rings, they come in, they rush in, they pull off your gloves. And John and I just like, we just fell into this like deep embrace. Both of us are just like bawling and just like, I love you, brother. This was awesome. Thank you so much. And what what was something I realized I don't think I ever could have understood without the actual physical experience of this is I can show up fully. I can even confront things physically with my presence and still have it come from a loving place, still have it come from a compassionate place. Because if I would have just stood there and been a punching bag for John that whole time, he wouldn't have gotten anything from it either. And so it was such a physical way to experience this isn't violent. Like none of it felt violent. Even, and I'm watching the other brothers fight. Like there were some young dudes, some really powerful dudes that like their 70% was like, whoa, I wouldn't be able to get hit like that. And like some of these guys went pretty hard with each other for 2 minutes. And same exact thing would happen. Gloves would come off, huge embrace, tons of tears, pure love. Like, and some of them had these just earth shaking transformations right in front of people where, you know, old trauma finally came to the surface that had probably been buried for years and years and years. And they got to actually process it. They would put the boxing gloves back on and put up like one of those, just like big, puffy blocking things. And someone would just hold it and just let this guy just go ape shit and scream and cry and just let it out. And it was like, oh, wow, okay. I had attached my story to this process because in the past, like, yeah, those skinheads who showed up, they weren't coming in with a peaceful, compassionate warrior spirit. They were there to destroy things. And
Mm.
that was how I pictured any type of confrontation for the rest of my life. So that was by far the transformational moment for me that weekend.
Oh man, that's so powerful. I grew up doing taekwondo for 6 years, and
Mm,
sparring and martial arts and everything was such a big part of that, from age 6 to 12, and teaching, and so there's definitely a part of me over the years that has yearned for that kind of warrior part of myself to come back and show up in different ways.
yeah,
But initially, even you explaining, like, when you're in your trailer doing the online Sacred Sons event and you're pounding on your chest and stuff like that, my initial knee-jerk reaction is like, ugh, like
yeah. Oh,
woo, like
toxic
like
manual
kind of this, like,
masculinity crap.
yeah, well, or just kind of like almost I have some skepticism, or um this, I guess, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm slightly repelled by kind of this showboating of masculinity sometimes.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
then, and so in many ways, and I have to realize, in what ways am I missing out by my reaction to something, And so hearing, because I can relate a lot to what you're saying with nice guy syndrome and wanting, saying yes, and chameleons. And so, but then to, try and put myself into your shoes and be like, okay, I'm going to do something that's uncomfortable, that I've been kind of dreading. I can make up a lot of excuses of why this shouldn't be a thing for me to be doing right now. But I'm stepping into the unknown, and what's on the other side of this, I'm not quite sure. But I'm going to have trust in the fact that this is a part of me that I've yet to tap into.
Hmm.
And the outcome of that was obviously one of the highlights and most memorable things that you're sharing today. And so for me, that's impactful too, because that this part of myself of aggression, which can, you know, have a negative connotation for me, or
Mhm.
anger. And so to be able to show maybe a healthy anger or healthy aggression, or um, is something that's really I'm taking away from this discussion today too. So thank you for sharing that
Yeah,
a lot.
absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just give you a quick example of how that shows up in real life now, because I got
Oh,
home
please. Yeah.
and just a week later, my mom, she had just recently had knee surgery, and on Sunday, it was the Sunday night before Thanksgiving. I get this urgent phone call. I missed the call, and I picked up the phone and listened to her message, and she was bawling. She's like, "Oh my God, Andrew, something happened with my knee. I'm lying on the floor and I can't move." And I was like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" So call her back. She's had her phone next to her. She's like, the paramedics are here. I'm going to the hospital. And I was like, okay, just get yourself there. I'll meet you there. So went to the hospital. My poor mom is just like in excruciating pain. And she's in the emergency room, but there's really nothing they can do for her right then except for just try to keep her pain under control. But even in the emergency room, it's like, they'd come over and like, how you doing, Mrs. Grove, and blah blah blah, and someone would come over and be like, how's your pain level? She's like, it's still at like a 9. Like I'm in so much pain here, and they'd be like, oh, okay, we'll see what we can do, and then they just disappear for 20 minutes. And so I'd have to go and find them and be like, hey, you said you were going to see what you can do. She's writhing in pain. So what are we going to do? Like, what is happening? Give us clear answers here. And throughout the next couple of days, because she was in the hospital for 4 days, it was this constant. And I feel a sense of empathy to the doctors and stuff that work in our medical system, because the medical system's in bad shape and they're so incredibly overwhelmed and overworked and all of that stuff. And that's not an excuse for my mom to get treated in the way she was. She just was basically left sitting in the bed by herself all day, all night. I would come in and be like, have the nurses like maybe at least helped you move your upper body? I know you can't move your leg right now, but have they helped you like, sit up for a minute to maybe like turn, like move your head around, move your shoulders around? No, like I even have to call to just get more water. And it takes 20 minutes after I call for them to even bring me more water. And then the doctors show up. Oh, we're going to get you PT. We're going to get you an occupational therapist in here to see what we can do with the knee, because they still didn't know what was going on. And even that, it's like, oh, we're going to get you a ultrasound scan. Well, it took 2 days for them to come back and say, oh, we can't do the ultrasound here in the hospital. That has to be outpatient later. So
Jeez.
just everything was like this. And the nice guy in me is like, oh, okay, well, just let us know what's coming up next. Like, can you just give us a little more information? And but that guy wanted to show up, and I was like, no, no, no. This is my mom. She needs help. We need to know what's going on. And so I was able to step into those situations, and I could feel my anger coming up, because unfortunately, I started to feel like people weren't listening and less anger was present in my voice. Because even when I was trying to have direct conversations from a very kind place, it was like, oh, yeah, we'll get to it. And it wasn't until brought some presence to it. And, me saying anger was in my voice is probably pretty damn polite still. Um, but being able to step up and be like, hey, this is what we need. We need answers. We need confirmed. When is this person showing up? What is the next step? That's where it showed it. That's where it showed up in real time. I didn't have to like feel bad about advocating for my mom. And Even I got to talk about this situation with one of the teachers at the Buddhist temple that we go to for meditation nights, and she was like, "Hey, look, even the Buddha never said anything about us not protecting ourselves, not advocating for the people we love." She's like, "All I would say is that forcefulness that you want to be able to present within those situations to advocate for your mom, remember that's an act of love. That is an act of compassion. It's an act of love for your mom. It's an act of love for yourself. And you don't have to treat anyone else with violence to still have power." She's like, "In fact, we believe that fullness of love and compassion is the ultimate power." So I got to put into practice all of this within the last few weeks and really feel into the space of like, I can still be that warrior spirit, and it can come from a super loving, super compassionate place. And I think that's like, quote, true masculinity. That's not the showboaty false masculinity that we tend to associate, big puffed up chest, I'm the man kind of shit. That's not masculinity. That's insecurity showing up. So I
That's
really
so
got
good.
to experience, oh, this is what that true, like, in Chinese medicine, it's the yang energy, like that full presence, that command. And yeah,
I can take so much from this. So thank you for sharing that. I, I've been noticing a little bit of a theme that I kind of want to circle back to too is, you about going to these events where it was listening to your intuition. And early on in the conversation, we were talking about, your subconscious um, and listening. And so something that I'd like to bring up is, two questions, but the first one would be, how do we become better listeners to ourselves?
one is doing what I just did there, learning to pause. Because I think that, and I'll just speak from my own experience. I feel like I've felt so much pressure to occupy space and speak up and speak faster. Because I also do a lot with the disc communication profile. I really love that as one of our kind of personality profiles. It's called disc, and it's a DISC, and we all kind of have a primary place that we play within that profile of how we communicate. And I tend to be a high C, which high C is they want to think things through before they speak. They tend to be more internal processors, and it's a slower pace. Like, even those of you listening, maybe some of you are almost getting annoyed with me because I know that I speak very slowly. I tend to pause a lot, and I'm sorry if that's not your flavor, but that's who I am. And so I felt a lot of pressure within my life. I've had a lot of people that I worked with that were high Ds or high Is who speak very quickly, very intensely, more reactive to situations. And it's not better, right, wrong, worse, whatever. It's just how we communicate. And in my life, I've worked with a lot of people that are that much faster pace, more reactive type of approach to communication. So there was often this like, come on, I need to know what you think about this, push, push, push. So I developed this bad habit, I think, of feeling like I just had to start talking as soon as they stopped talking. I forgot that it's fine. As soon as someone asked me a question, I forgot over time because I worked with so many of these leaders over time. It's fine for me to just sit back, take a breath, and actually hear what my body and what my heart, what my soul wants to actually respond with. versus just as soon as they ask the question, well, I mean, what I think about that is, I mean, I think that maybe if, what if we kind of, and it's like, for 30 seconds, I didn't say shit. I just tried to occupy space. Instead, what I've retaught myself, which I think is actually more of my natural place to be, is when I receive a question, when I hear a statement, I feel so much more at ease now to take a breath. Let me really take that in. Let me give myself the time to digest that very thoughtful question that you just asked. Let me give myself the time and energy or space to digest all of these things that you just shared with me so I can actually respond from a place that has thoughtfulness behind it. So that'd probably be number one. And I think that that'll probably speak to a lot of people that maybe even naturally you might find yourself having a tendency to just jump in really fast. And that's okay, because that might just be your natural communication style. The Achilles heel might be you're not giving yourself enough time and space to really feel into a question or feel into what's shared with you. Or for people that do have a slower pace naturally, but feel the pressure to speed up, maybe it's time to give ourselves some permission to go back to our natural, which is take that moment, digest things. And I'll give you a little tip, by the way, too, for those of you that are out there that are like, yeah, that's more my pace. Um, Especially when we're talking to people that have a higher pace of communication, very often we find ourselves in relationship with people that have faster communication because my belief is that like the heart knows that we need what they have. So we'll find ourselves in intimate relationships with people that are different from us. We'll find ourselves in business relationships with people that are different from us because the heart knows that they have something to offer us. So in those conversations, one of the things we can do to take responsibility for how we communicate is we can say to them, hey, I know that you probably want an answer right away. Give me a few moments. I want to really digest this. And I'll share with you my thoughts. Just give me a few moments here. What that does is it just keeps them from going into what was really more of a natural reaction for them to be like, did you hear me? Why aren't you stop talking? Because to them, it doesn't make sense. It's like, it's very easy for them to respond fast without that need to internally process. They'll talk it out loud. They'll externally process. So if they
That's really
don't hear
good.
us say, hey, I got to think about this for a second. Can I have a minute? They just think we're not listening to them. That's the story that is coming up for them. So that would be tip number one. Tip number two for listening more and really hearing ourselves more deeply is spending time connecting to the other intelligences within us versus just the head analytical brain. Part of my background within coaching is I'm a multiple brain integration coach and trainer. Multiple brain integration came about because science and medical research has shown that the heart actually has intelligence that it's sending to the head brain to be processed. And same thing with the entire enteric system, basically from the top, well, pretty much from your mouth all the way till the exit. There is, oh my gosh, why am I forgetting? Neurons, similar to what we have in the head brain. In fact, like the enteric system itself, it has a similar number of neurons to like a cat and a cat brain. So this intelligence, we're able to kind of map how much there's more information going up to the head brain than there is coming back down. And there's a hell of a lot of information coming back down from the head. So that tells us that there's a lot of stuff coming from the body up to get processed. And so one of the ways that we can do this is just spending time bringing attention to that space and starting up a conversation with it. So if you have something on your mind that you're trying to work out, you can just take a couple breaths, get yourself into your body, just kind of focus your attention into the heart space. And this will feel probably really weird and silly for those of you that have never done anything like this at first, but just literally ask, okay, heart, what do you know that I don't know about this? And intuitively, you know what your heart intelligence is. Like if I asked you, David, like what do you think the intelligence of the heart might be? What are some of the things that like the heart it might give us intelligence wise?
Gentleness, compassion, obviously love is in
Yeah,
there. So it's nothing
100%.
that's nothing abrasive. I would say it's going to be embracing versus abrasive.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. And you know that because that's how we talk about the heart, right? We find it within the verbal cues. Like when we say, my heart is telling me, dot, 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 that's actually true. The heart is telling us that. When it comes to matters of the heart, which is another thing that we say, that's where that intelligence lives within us, our connection, our compassion, our desires, our values, the things that we truly love in the world. Those things live within the heart. And so that's one of the things that you can just play with if you're listening and you want to start to connect to a deeper resource of intelligence, just start having conversations with it.
Man, I've got a lot of notes to take from this. It's really good. So, well, then to follow up with that question though, so how do we become better listeners to others?
I love this question. Number one, the first thing that I said, I'll come back to that. Take a breath. Um, One of the things that will really help with becoming a better listener is starting to become aware of what's happening within us as we are in that seat of listening. Within our communication courses, we talk about like there's three seats that we sit in within a conversation. There's the speaking seat, there's the offering part. Okay, I'm going to offer you my thoughts. So that's one seat. There is the inquiring seat, which is now I'm going to ask you a question. And then the third seat is that seat of listening. It's the receiving. And I really like that word receiving. If if I start to be in the seat of receiving, which you are now, right, David? Like you're receiving the answer to this question. And same with those of you that are listening right now. And you start to check in with yourself a bit. Okay, what's happening for me right now as I sit here and listen? Am I starting to want to justify my own belief systems about what this person is sharing? Am I starting to go into my own stories? Am I starting to create what I want to respond with so that I sound really intelligent within this conversation? And by the way, as we're doing this, this isn't time to judge ourselves for these things. This is about observation. This is about wise awareness, is what they call it in Buddhism. Wise awareness means there's no judgment in the awareness, it's just observation. Oh, I am now aware that my mind has a want to be the smart person in the conversation. So it starts to formulate what I'm going to say next before the other person is done speaking. So that step of awareness of what happens for us personally as we're in that seat of trying to be the great listener, that will bring a lot forward for us right there as far as our quote work is concerned. And it's let me just say this too. These habits and patterns that exist within us, they have been sculpted into place for most of our life. They would, these could be habits and patterns you observed within your parents as a 2 or 3 year old kid. As you started to really understand the world, you could have observed these patterns and habits within your parents at 2 or 3 years old. And that's how deep this runs, the want to be the right person at the table. If we just constantly saw dad railroad mom in every conversation, no, 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 honey, listen, this is what we need to do. If we saw that habit over and over again at that point in our life, The subconscious, which is the part that's recording everything, it can't help but go, oh, that's how we treat people. We don't actually listen to them. We just tell them what we think. So there's no reason to feel guilty about it. There's no reason to feel terrible about ourselves because we didn't consciously choose to have that pattern and habit. But it's important to recognize that, like, that's the Mississippi River in there. Like, this isn't a trickling stream of patterns. This is like the Mississippi River. So it is going to continue to show up in your life for a long time. All we can do is continually become wisely aware. And the next step is acceptance. There I am. The wise awareness piece is to see it for what it is without judgment. The acceptance piece is, okay, here's my pattern again. Here's my work to do. No guilt, no shame, just, yep, okay, keep going. That's my acceptance piece. Because then we have this very beautiful place to have choice, this compassionate place to have choice. It doesn't have all of this, like, oh, damn it, there you are again, thinking you have to be the right one in the conversation, thinking you have to have the best answer. God, that's so much ego. And then that's where the guilt and the shame starts to come in. And that's really hard to have beautiful choice left. Then it's just coming from a place of, you're a bad person.
You did a really good job on it. Explain that, because I think for myself, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but my ability to listen desperately needs to improve. And I feel like for, obviously with clients in my chair, but mainly with my children and with my wife, those are relationships that mean a lot to me. And so being able to begin to use, this, what is it? We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should probably be listening more than talking and utilizing those resources better. And so I really like what you just said. That's so poignant. If people are interested in getting more information about how to work with you or follow you on Instagram, or where can they find you?
Instagram is where I'm most active. And even that, I'm active enough that, there's things to interact with there. But yeah, Instagram is usually the best resource. It's just andrew.carruthers. You can go to my website too. I'll just be totally honest and vulnerable myself. The website desperately needs updated. It got designed many years ago when I was still not real clear on exactly who I am and exactly what I offer as a coach. Primarily the people I work with at this point are people who I consider, I'm just going to put in air quotes, leaders. Leaders to me, it's not a position that you hold. So that doesn't mean that you have to own a company. It doesn't mean you have to lead a team. It's educators are leaders. Coaches are leaders. These are people that hold a role within the world that other people look to them. Honestly, a lot of you, if you are hairdressers out there, you are probably a leader within your community. If you have people that sit in your chair and they say, oh my gosh, David, like, what do you think about this? Like, what would you do? If people come to you with those types of questions, you probably have some level of the presence of being a leader within your community. And so that's the kind of person that I work with at this point, is people who do have that type of presence or are looking to develop that part of themselves and are also willing to do the deep inner work to actually get there. So if you go to the website, you don't see all of that because it's not really real apparent within the website. That's who I work with. That's the kind of work that I do at this point.
Okay. Well, thanks for the vulnerability and the clarification too. That's helpful. So I love to ask this question too, at the end of the interviews. Like, for you, what do you feel is one of the most important things if someone's listening to take away from today's topics and discussion?
The thing that pinged for you, the moment that maybe it wasn't even something I said, maybe it was something that David said, but that moment that something happened physically within you, where maybe your gut tightened, maybe your heart opened up, maybe your shoulders got tighter, maybe they dropped, maybe you took a big breath. So if you had that kind of response at some point within this, that's your thing to take away from this. Because none of you that are listening are going to be able to retain, more than like 10% of what we discussed today. So your personal 10% is that part that spoke to you. It spoke to your heart, it spoke to your gut, it spoke to your breath. That's what I would hope you would take away.
Oh, so good. Andrew, I thank you for your time today, for your knowledge, your example, because I can relate to a lot of the things that you've shared. Um, and I look forward to continuing this discussion at some point in the near future.
For sure.
But thank you for your time again, and I look forward to having you on again.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate the invite and the opportunity.